You're all here because this is a pretty significant time in the overall project for One Washington. And we want to welcome you. Your agency leadership has identified most of you as participants in the Business Capabilities Workshops. We're at a really exciting time now with One Washington. And we're at the point right now where we're at a fundamentally critical place where we are going to be developing capabilities, business capabilities that will be used in the selection of a provider, a SaaS provider for the enterprise resource planning software that we're going to be purchasing. And our ability to execute efficiently over the next few weeks for the schedule that we have and this activity that we have, which is actually really quite large, is critical, and it's based on your ability to participate with us and to help us through this process. We're going to find a solution, an ERP solution, through this effort that will be eventually implemented into the state and will serve all of your agencies as well. So your participation is critical here. So thank you for being here, and thank you for your commitment to participate in this process. You really should feel honored to be here and to be selected to be representatives of your agency, because you're participating now in the largest project underway at the state, and you're actually going to be making history. You're going to be doing something that hasn't been done before. So we hope you take it as seriously as we do. Okay, as you're about to see, we do have a lot of ground to cover, both today and during the workshops. We're going to move at a pretty fast pace, but we will take time for your questions. We do want you to understand that it's important that you make sure that you ask your questions so that you are at the point where you understand ERP and your role in this process moving forward. We want to hear your voice. We value what you have to say, and your input actually is going to be fundamental in our ability to choose an effective supplier and an effective solution. So your agency does rely on you to provide your input into this process. Please stay engaged and ask questions that will help you understand ERP and the role that you'll play in ERP. You are responsible for all the information presented during this presentation today. If you have to leave early, you're still responsible for this information. So make sure that you follow up and make sure that you don't leave without the handout that you're going to be given as you leave the room today. This session is being recorded on Skype, and the Skype recording will be sent out via a link. Please give us about 48 hours for that to show up, and then you'll be able to watch this again, and you'll be able to forward this on to others that may not have been able to participate with us today or be here today. We do have people online right now. They will be asking questions throughout the day, and so we will stop to take their questions as well. All right, so there was a sign-in sheet back at the table before you came in. Did everybody have a chance to sign in? If you did not sign in, please do so. We are required to keep track of everybody who attended the session, so it's important that you do sign in. Restrooms are outside here. This building, the way it's constructed, I'm making a lot of noise, I know, on this microphone. Sorry about that. I got to point it the right way. The way this building is constructed is that there's elevators in the center, and right across from the elevators on every floor, you'll find restrooms. So there are restrooms right out over here and then straight across the hall over here. Building exits. On this floor, which is the ground level floor, the primary building exit is straight to the back, and as you go out the door, you'll see subway right across the street from you. If there's an emergency, that's the primary exit on this floor. If you're one floor up, the primary exit's out the other way, right out towards the big tree. Location of restaurants, if you decide that you're going to stick around here after the session is over and you want to go to a restaurant, of course there's Subway, there's McConey's on 4th Avenue, there's a number of restaurants, and you can take the Dash if you need to, which is free, to go all the way up and down Capitol. All right, so as Stacy has mentioned a couple of times, there are light refreshments at the back. There's water back there. You're welcome to partake of what you're interested in. And we do want to remind you again that we do want you to ask questions today. However, we ask you to be patient with our process, and you see that there are a number of microphones around the room. We'll get some more people to distribute this, but if you have a question, please ask it into the microphone because we are on Skype. So how many microphones do we have in the back? Just raise your hand if you're going to need to speak on a microphone, and somebody will get one to you. Okay, we got one over there, and we'll make sure that we've got these to pass around as well. So please ask it into the mic. Even if you think you have a strong voice, it doesn't get onto Skype. if you don't ask it into the mic. Okay, there is going to be an opportunity at the end of the presentations today for additional questions. We're going to keep the Accenture specialists and the state specialists here available for you to ask questions if you need some further clarification. If you're uncomfortable asking a question in the broad room here, you'll have a chance to meet with people and drill down a little bit more. So please plan on hanging out a little bit after we're all done, and you can dig as deep as you want. So I want you to do what I'm doing right now. Take out your phone, turn it on, and silence your phone. Okay? If you haven't done it, please silence your phone. So we're going to be covering quite a number of topics today. We're going to have an introduction for One Washington so that you understand what the program is really trying to cover and when it's trying to cover it, how it breaks down, how it relates to enterprise resource planning. Then we're going to have a fairly lengthy discussion on what ERP is, the what, the why, and the how for ERP, and you're going to get an opportunity to understand at a kind of a grassroots level how to connect all the dots and what this is really going to look like moving down the road and how this can impact you and your agency. Then we're going to talk about how it's going to be integrated into the systems that you're probably familiar with. Later on, we'll take a look at a couple of examples, and we will actually go through a flow process, a flow diagram. And then later on, we're going to talk about the business capability workshops that start in October and your role in those and the expectations related to your role in those. So it's pretty important that you're engaged, you stay attentive, and you ask questions in case you need to ask those questions. All right, so I want to introduce our director. Stacy Scott has been with One Washington for 2.5 years. She knows everything that is past, present, and probably in the future for One Washington. If you have a question about One Washington and what this is all about, our director can answer that question for you. Stacy is the kind of person who, those of us that work with her know how dedicated she is. She puts many long hours into this program, is absolutely committed to its success and to the success of the state of Washington with respect to ERP. What Stacy would like you to know about her is that she has 2 beautiful grandchildren and 1 on the way. So with that, I'm going to turn the time over to Stacy.
Thank you, Steve. That was an impromptu question yesterday for me. It's like, what do you want people to know about you? It's like, I have these gorgeous grandchildren. They are absolutely wonderful in the light of my life. So the more time I can spend with them, awesome. So the only announcement that Steve missed, and he did such a great job, so thanks so much. But if you are online and listening and watching this presentation, you can type in questions anytime to the Skype chat box. And I have a couple people here in the room monitoring that chat box, and they will stop us, raise their hands, and your questions will get asked in here. So just if you're here, you get to ask questions, and if you're online, you get to ask questions. And I have to tell you, I am really overwhelmed by the turnout this morning. We've done a lot of meetings here, and we know parking is really difficult, and it's hard to get to this building. And so usually this room is kind of vacant, and everyone attends via Skype. But I see that this room is overfilled. We're over capacity, so don't tell Department of Enterprise Services. But I think that just indicates your commitment to this program and your enthusiasm for this next stage that we're going into. So I just thank you all for your support and your presence here today. So that's great. The first thing I wanted to do was introduce our team because we got a lot of new faces this year. So can I have the whole team come in here and stand up, and I can try and point you out. So I have Ava over here in the corner. She's a project manager with our team. Sept, who I like to call Anthony like his mother does, but he likes to be called Sept, who is our technical resource on the team. Christy and Terry are right here at the table, and they are our procurement business capabilities folks. And so if you are in procurement, you're going to be spending a lot of time with them. Next to them is Trin. She is on the financial business capability side. So if you're from finance, you're going to be spending a lot of time with her. And then I'm going to go back over to the other corner. So I have Becky, who is our extraordinary contract specialist, who's going to help us guide us through this process of developing this procurement and making sure we take all the right steps. Next is John Wright. He is the transformation administrator. He is leading the organizational change management of this program, which is a huge task. You've already met Steve behind him. Next to Steve is Lori Jones. She is our business intelligence and data governance specialist. She just joined the team. We have Jeff standing there, kind of looking comfortable. You're going to hear a lot from him today. He is the lead on the business capabilities work, and so he's going to talk about ERP1 and give us a lesson. Next to him is Rich. He's on that business capabilities team on the procurement side. Behind him is Ben Guyer. He has been with the team as long as I have, and so I'm sure everyone knows Ben, right? Yeah. Next to him is Cherry. She is on the procurement side, working with DES on their other work streams that are outside of business capabilities. Next to her is Ramsey, and he is on the finance non-tech side. In front of him is Tara. Sorry, I know how to pronounce your name. Tara, and she is on the finance business capabilities side. And I think I got everyone, didn't I? Yeah, so that's our team. So I just wanted you to know who they are. So if you have questions during the break or after the session today, you can seek them out, and they are much more experts than I am. Steve gave me way too much credit because I do not know everything. So anyway. With that, I want to start with an introduction to One Washington, because I think there's like this whole varied level of people's knowledge of One Washington. So a lot of you have heard this before. I see a lot of familiar faces, but then I see a few faces that I haven't seen before, and maybe you haven't heard as much about One Washington. So One Washington is really a business transformation program. The state has tried to do this several times to bring in modern systems, to change the way we do business. This is the latest effort, and this really is about putting the business processes first, meeting the needs of the business, and then really choosing software that's going to help us do those business processes. Those glasses were just not meant to be. Oh, that was my other thing. What a day. So as we talk about what is under that One Washington umbrella, we talk about enterprise, and enterprise is not trying to boil everything that the state does into one common process. It's identifying what are those common business processes in the area of finance, procurement, budget, and HR that really need to be done in a common way. And the purpose of that is really so that we get that common data out of our system. So all the time we get requests from legislators, policymakers, directors, and they want to know this information. And because we don't have common systems, we're always like pulling information from different places, trying to make it match together, trying to get to the right number. And that's really the value of One Washington, is that all of this data will be on one platform. It will be apples and apples, and we're able to pull data, and we'll have correct information that's timely, accurate, and complete. And that's really the goal of the system. So when you start thinking about your agency's line of business, don't get worried that we're going to get into your business systems, because that is not the purpose of One Washington. It's really about identifying what is common and making sure we're doing that in a common way. The house really kind of represents the journey of the One Washington program. And so when you start at the bottom, in the 2013-15 biennium, legislature gave OS money to do a business case. And that really started the One Washington program again, and really designing what the future of business processes would look like for the state. In the 15-17 biennium, we were also given funding, and we started doing a lot of readiness work. So one of the key pieces of readiness work was this chart of accounts future state study. And that is a best practice, to really think about how you want to redesign your chart of accounts before you actually implement a new financial system. So you make sure that system really is collecting the data you want and doing what you want it to do and providing the data back out. So we did a first round of refinement in that area. That was the expenditure sub-object, and I see lots of faces that were involved in that work. And then we also did a lot of readiness on the procurement side. So the business case said, we'll implement a procurement system first. That is, we started flow charting as is business processes we saw that every agency was doing things so differently, using terms differently, that it was like, how could we implement a system when we can't even talk the same language? And so there was a key group of procurement people that came together, documented those what those common business processes would look like, created a definitions dictionary, started that common terminology that we're going to use as we move to a new system. And that was really a great basis to get ready for a common procurement system when we don't even have a system today that all agencies use. For this biennium, we got funded for some really key pieces of planning design kind of work, and it kind of depends on your perspective how you label those. But the big one was really that program blueprint, and it took all of last year to do that. It was published in June, but it really set out the timeline for the next 8 years and the projects underneath the program to really actually change our business processes and implement software to support those. So it really laid out that whole plan and what resources we need over the next 8 years to do that. We also did a business intelligence strategy. And so if we want to have good data at the end that's connected, that's usable, that is valid, we really need to have a strategy of how we're going to get there. And so this document really helped us work through that path. Like how do we do it step by step? How do we get to where the data is quality and we meet our goal at the end of this implementation? We also did an integration strategy and plan, and I see lots of agencies that were involved in that. We started with the OCIO's application inventory, identified all of the administrative systems. So there were 314 administrative systems that we did system impact summaries on. And what that did is it looked at the functionality of that system. Could it be replaced by the ERP system, the common enterprise system we're going to implement? And if so, made a recommendation that we could retire that system. If the system did true line of business work that couldn't be replaced by the enterprise system, we identified it that that's one that's going to need to have the integration change as we move to the new system. So we have provided that information back to the agencies to really help them with their planning and what their agency connection to One Washington looks like as we move forward. In the supplemental budget last spring, we actually were awarded extra money. And so that kind of got a lot of people's attention. It's like, oh, that's quite an investment in this One Washington program so far. And so I think that's really something important to note, that there is really strong support from agencies for this program, strong support from the legislature for this program. People see the need. People see the need that this is the time really to get this work done, and they are investing in this program. So that work, that additional funding that we got for this year allows us to start doing the work to choose that for the software for that first project. So the first project is an integrated finance procurement system. And we're calling them business capabilities and technical specifications, and we're going to gather those, and that's what you guys are going to help us with over the next few months. And then those will go into that procurement document that we'll issue next March to actually choose software. So that's where we are. And then, of course, the future is just implementing those systems and moving forward with the program. This is a picture of the timeline out of the program blueprint. So you can see, maybe you can see, I'm not sure which one to do. We have the implementation of the finance procurement system. We're right here in this phase where we're going to create this procurement for the integrated finance procurement system, begin implementation of that system November of 2019, so a little over a year from now. And then we're going to implement that system in 3 different ways. This first wave is 10 key agencies, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. And then the rest of the agencies go in wave 2. Wave 3 was for expanded functionality, but one of the things we put in expanded functionality was inventory management, and we've gotten lots of feedback from agencies that needs to be in the initial deployment. So we've made a commitment that we'll review that decision when we do the implementation plan a year from now. So I really anticipate that inventory management will come up, and I'm not sure what will be in this wave 3. But that's how we're going to roll out the finance procurement system. So an interesting piece is that when they did the business case in 2014, they were really looking at on-premise deployed systems, where we own the software, it's our infrastructure, we manage that. And between then and now, the technology world has just changed so much. And so as we did the blueprint in the last year, it really was evident that we needed to do software as a service. When you look at the companies that are in our market providing that level of software, they're all putting all their research and development money in software as a service, cloud hosted, and that's where we really want to be, because your software is always kept up to date and you don't get stuck on an old version. And that was a fear of a lot of people, that the state would take so long to implement something that it would be outdated by the time we were using it. And so this really takes that out of the place. So we have chose software as a service for finance and procurement. But when we talked about budget and HR payroll, we're thinking, oh my goodness, that's a few years away. What is going to happen in the technology market between now and then? And so we didn't want to make any decisions about that. So instead we said that we would stop at this point, look at the functionality and the system we implemented for finance and procurement, see if it met budget and HR payroll's needs, and if it didn't, we'd go back out to market for that software. So there's a lot of benefits about having an integrated system and having all your data on one platform, which we really like, but we want to make sure that each line of business really has the right tools to do their job effectively. So that's the plan for that. And then we've committed that we would do business intelligence as we went along. So when we choose this integrated finance procurement software, it will come with some kind of business intelligence built into it. And we want to maximize the use of that, but we recognize that that may not meet all of our state needs. And so as we implement that with the finance procurement system, we'll also look at other things we need to roll out, and so that we really have a robust business intelligence platform by the end of the program. This top box is the Wave 1 agencies, and the point of choosing these, we went through a lot of iterations of this. We did a lot of interviews of agencies, really trying to pick the right group for this. We wanted to make sure that we had agencies with several different kinds of revenue, several different perspectives, whether they're central service, we have a separately elected in there. So it's kind of a diverse group. But it really goes to the fact that when we begin that implementation in November of next year, everyone's going to be involved. So if you're a Wave 2 agency, you're still coming to those configuration sessions at the beginning. Everyone's going to be involved throughout that deployment, but just selecting these 10 for that Wave 1, it really helps us focus and stand up some of the business processes right up front, make sure the system is working, and then it gives us another year to refine those business processes for the rest of the agency. So everyone will be involved throughout the deployment of the project, but we really want to test the system in a thoughtful way first before we extend out the whole state. And this was really the approach of the Executive Steering Committee, just how do we manage that risk to make sure that we can be successful. This is where I transition to what we're doing this fiscal year. So do we have any questions on history before we go forward? Okay. So for this fiscal year, we have 5 different work streams, and these are them, and I'm going to walk really quickly through all of them, and then I'll turn it over to the next section of the show. So the organizational change management, that is a lesson learned with all projects. You should have started change management earlier. You should have done more change management. I feel like you probably can't do enough change management to get the approval of everyone, but that is something we're trying to do. We published a change management strategy last spring. We're developing a change management plan that is a lower level, more tactical plan this fall. And then that will also inform agencies more about what their role is. So we'll provide templates, we'll provide guidance, but we also need support from agencies really to make this effective. You'll need your own change management support within your agency. One of the things we're doing to support the Executive Steering Committee is we're rolling out these advisory committees. So as you work through your workshops this fall, you're going to have all agencies in these workshops. You're going to have a lot of ideas. There's going to be some issues that may come down to policy or direction, and then they'll get raised to like an advisory committee. So this will be a smaller group of leaders in the areas of finance, procurement, budget, HR, change, BI, and technical. And they can actually hopefully boil those issues down a little bit more and formulate them into a recommendation to go to the executive steering committee. So that will be their role. That will be that intermediary level that will kind of help move things to decisions timely. This other little chart at the bottom. So did you guys get to attend our statewide update in the end of July? A few people did. We try to periodically, just provide an update on what the program is doing. And so we did have over 200 attendees. We did a survey that we sent out right afterwards and said, is One Washington providing you enough information? And 85% of the people said, yeah, you are. And so we're always going to keep collecting data points, and we're really about listening to feedback. So we really want you guys to give us feedback because we want to make sure we're meeting agencies' needs for information, and also so that you guys can fully participate, because this really is a statewide effort, and it takes every agency and everyone in this room, everyone on Skype, and a whole bunch more really to make this happen. So we need you to be engaged with us. So thank you. So we're going to talk a lot about the business capabilities workshops at the end of this meeting this morning. So this is just a high-level overview. You're at September 12th. This is ERP 101. This is introduction to what we're doing this fall. We are going to do some pilot workshops. Some of the areas that we're going to be discussing we felt were real complicated, and we felt like some agencies were really complicated in how they did it. So some agencies have been invited in to do a pilot workshop, and that also helps our team learn from that feedback how to run the bigger workshop in a better way. So there's the kind of multi-purpose there. And then the common capabilities workshops for the whole group begin October 4th. They'll go through November. As we work through those common capability workshops, we'll identify a lot of things that are unique to the state of Washington, right? We are unique. We do business in a special way. So we'll follow up in December on those uniques. Those probably will not be statewide workshops. They'll probably be more targeted to the agencies that have that unique requirement. And then we will pull all of those capabilities together, and then they will go into the procurement document in March. So we're going to talk a lot more about this in a bit. The third work stream is a finance readiness work stream. So this is not technology dependent. This is just things we want to do to improve our business processes before we implement a new system. So they have chosen 5 different areas that they want to focus on. So chart of accounts, consolidating the payee file, standardizing interfaces in and out of AFRS today. That will be an easier lift to the new system if they're standardized. Accounting training, this is a little bit interesting. We have really relied on our transaction codes and our program index to do a lot of the behind-the-scenes accounting in the system. And as we get a new system, we're all going to have to remember how to do debits and credits and how we want to do these transactions. And so we're going to be setting up some accounting training starting for next year to get people reminded about like what happens really behind those transaction codes, because we'll have to recreate all that in the new system. And then also a federal grants community of practice. So I'm sure a lot of you will be asked to participate in these activities. The fourth work stream is around procurement readiness. And again, this is not technology dependent. This is really One Washington working closely with Department of Enterprise Services. They are the procurement business owner. They are the statutory authority for procurement in the state. But we're really supporting them and getting ready for this big change. So helping them review laws and policies, helping them develop that contract management guide. Spend data. Spend data is going to be so important, and that's critical to One Washington's success. So really, what is that data that we want to collect from all agencies from these transactions? Making sure we're very clear about that. E-marketplace, that one's kind of exciting. When we implement a new system, agencies will get to shop kind of like Amazon. It will be right there on your screen, and you'll get to go out to the website and shop, and it comes into your cart. And then when it's in your cart, it goes through the process to be received and paid in the system. This is really different. We don't have anything like that today, and so we need policies around that. So we're helping them develop that policy. And then the last one is really helping them update that procurement manual. And that will really help us when we get to configuration. Then we'll know how processes need to be configured in order to be in compliance with the policy. So all of this is really great work that's going to help set us up for success as we get into implementation. The last work stream we have going is a huge one, which people always care about because we're talking about money. So through the blueprint, we early defined what the One Washington program costs were for the next 8 years. But the big question out there has always been, well, what about agencies? They're going to need help to participate. They're going to need help to support this. And so throughout the summer, we have met with all of the agencies. We took materials from the blueprint and the integrations plan and tried to boil them down to where they were useful tools for agencies to walk through and really figure out what their impact is. And then we've asked them to put that into not a decision package, but into a spreadsheet and send that back to us. So those were due this week, and those are coming in, and now we're consolidating those agency requests. So from here, we'll take those agency requests and we'll sort them by the natural agencies and the human agencies and that. And then we'll meet with the budget analysts that look at that set of budgets. So that's our next step. And then hopefully we will be able to consolidate that into one package, and then we will put one decision package in the governor's budget for One Washington for the program and agencies. So that's how it's been designed, that's how the legislature expects it, and that's how the OFM budget office has directed us to do that. So we'll be working through that this fall. That doesn't mean we won't be reaching out to agencies to clarify requests or help in sorting out things. I'm sure we're going to get a whole realm of requests, and we're already like, So we'll look forward to your help on that. At this point, I am going to turn it over to Jeff unless anyone has questions for me. Oh, I see one. Wait, can we get a microphone over there? Lori's running.
Yeah, I just had a question on the chart of accounts. You mentioned like the program index. Is it the intention to like get rid of some of the coding before we go on the new systems, or?
I think the idea is to clean it up because over time, 35 years we've been on the mainframe after system. Agencies have used different parts of the coding differently, right? And so what we want to do this year is really understand how agencies are using each of these pieces. So when we build out the new chart of accounts, each of these have a defined place, and everything has a defined purpose that's common, right? So where you're not using it one way and another agency's using it another way. It's to get to what that definition needs to be.
Okay, so I guess our concern is, like, we have programming that would then interface to the new system. So if you were changing, say, the program index is maybe 3 characters now, or, it means something else, that would be a bigger lift on our agency.
And we've had a lot of those discussions as agencies have been trying to figure out their budget requests. And the thing is, we don't know until we choose software, right? So we're going to go through this procurement process. We'll choose software. Probably by this time next year, we'll know who that apparently successful vendor is. And then each software does it a little bit differently, right? They do integrations differently. They do their chart of accounts differently. And so as soon as we choose software, we'll start narrowing that down, defining that, letting agencies know what that means, right? But we've provided everything we know at this point, and I know it's frustrating.
Okay, so there's no guarantee that we'll still have transaction codes or the same kind of structures and just change to
I think the
be
same.
more common.
I might look to Jeff to help me, but our idea is not to break downstream systems, right? But our idea is to clean up this chart of accounts to have good data. So I would think if we needed something for downstream systems, we would find a way to keep it fed.
Okay.
Maybe?
So like on the, I just, like as an example, the sub objects that were changed. We didn't actually change the structure. We mainly just made it so we got rid of, more than half of them, and it was more state level. And so I guess that's kind of what I'm getting at, is that if all the other coding is just more or less consolidating it, but keeping the same structures, the same.
Will you cover this in ERP 101?
These are all good questions, and I'll answer them the best I can right now, because what you're doing is you're starting to wade into implementation versus choosing software. Everybody still hear me? Okay. So before I answer that question, I'm going to spend 2 minutes telling you a little bit more about myself. When I started this long ago and far away, my hair wasn't white like this. And it was probably closer to this gentleman's hair right here, very dark. I earned this white hair, and I've implemented ERP in state and local government now for 23 years. I've done 4 different states, and the question you're asking is the same question that comes up every single time. Are my codes going to stay the same? And I can tell you that the codes will change on our side of the fence, on the ERP side. If you have a system currently that is going to live on after ERP, we always implement what's called a translate engine, which would move whatever transaction code you might rely on in an external system into ERP. So you shouldn't have to change your side of the equation. Does that answer your question? Okay, good. Another question.
So for the procurement strategy that was referenced, it references the activities that are taking place on the procurement readiness work group, which is that DES group, but the focus of that group are procurements related to 3926, the goods and services. At what point are other procurement types going to be, I guess, in a work stream or incorporated or discussed?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to put Ava on the spot here because that's her work stream a little bit. I'm not familiar with the number that you quoted just now, so I can't really address it. Can you ask the question one more time, please? With the mic.
For the procurement readiness work group, the focus of that work group is RCW 3926, the goods and services, but there are a variety of other procurement laws that we procure things. So at what point in this process are those going to be addressed, or is that just going to be up to the individual agencies to discuss how that's going to be incorporated in the ERP?
Okay. I can give you. Yeah. I can tell you that if it's not being covered in the work stream now, that the thought process is that that's part of implementation. We've got a lot of work that we have to do during implementation on how we would actually procure and what the specific business processes are and what the commonalities are. The ones that are being worked on now are things that we can start to sort of move through without knowing what the software looks like. And I know that may not be a very precise answer for you, but that's the best I can do right now. Okay. Any other questions on what Stacy talked about before we dive into ERP? Okay, so I like to know who my crowd is. I'd like you to raise your hand in this crowd if you remember doing accounting on green bar paper. All right. For those of you who don't know what it is, it wasn't fun. Okay, now let's go back a little further. How many of you remember carrying punch cards to a window to run a program? How many of you dropped them? Not fun putting them back in order, right? Okay, that's one. Oh no, this is 1,200. Okay, so things have changed over the years, okay? And if you think back all the way back to punch cards, right? Those were instructions given to a computer to allow it to do some sort of calculation and generate a result. And then we came through with mainframe systems that had business logic built into them, and things got a little better, although we were still relying on certain things to get information into the system, and more importantly, it wasn't as fun to get it out of the system. And then we made a transition to ERP, and ERP really happened back in the early 90s. I started implementing this stuff at Arthur Andersen back in 1991, I believe, was my first job. And I can tell you that things have transitioned since then to what we're going to be implementing here in SAS. But as we worked with the folks on the business capabilities team from the state, they're much in the same position you are. They know R-Stars or your current system, and they know how it works. And we started to talk about capabilities, and they were struggling a little bit. They were struggling because they didn't really understand what ERP was. So I gave them sort of an impromptu little 2-day couple session class and talked about ERP, and some lights started to go on. So that's why I'm standing before you today, so that I can give you a basis of understanding of sort of what is ERP and what's it going to do for you, and how's it maybe a little bit different than what you have right now. So ERP, it's not EARP, and it's not why its last name. It's Enterprise Resource Planning, and it's really focused on a couple of things. Enterprise, in the context of what we're going to be doing here, is the state of Washington finance and accounting business, okay? So just think of it from that perspective in this first piece. The second piece is HR payroll, and then there's some budgeting later on. So let's talk about the enterprise as the state of Washington and finance and accounting for today's discussion. Resources, what are they? Well, they're you folks sitting here in the room. They're assets that you have out there in each of your agencies, and it's also money and capital, right? So at its simplest level. And then the third area, P for planning, it's really organizing activities. And organizing activities in ERP, we're going to talk about it in a minute, but they're really business process driven, right? There's inherent logic in this in all the applications these days that allows information to get into the system, be validated, and flow through the back end. So at its, at its core, it's business management software, right? It is focused on helping you to integrate all areas of your business from a finance and accounting perspective. And there's a wide variety of functionality there. Listed here is finance and accounting, contracts and procurement, HR, payroll, budgeting, and then on the back side, the reporting and analysis piece. So that's just a broad definition of what ERP is. Any questions so far? Okay, I'm going to ask everybody that has a pencil and something to write with, raise that pencil. Okay, I watched some of you try and grab some of the presentations this morning. Good. Take notes, because I'm going to ask for participation. I figure if you're participating, you're getting it. I know that when I sit in a crowd and I get that blank look on my face, I'm probably at home sitting by my pool. So let's make sure that we participate. Okay, what are the key benefits of ERP? So there's really 4 areas: efficiency, analytics, reliability, and cost. And let's just talk about efficiency for a second. In state government, for years and years and years, every year we get asked to do more with less. How many agree with that? Put your hand up. Okay. So what does ERP do for us from that perspective? It really allows us to do a couple of things. Number one, workflow is super important, right? How many of you have to fill out a piece of paper currently to get something done and take it to somebody to get them to sign it? Okay. How often does it get signed immediately? Not very often, right? Your boss? Okay, good move. Okay, if we can't laugh, we're not having any fun. Okay, and then, so workflow in this system you're going to see as we talk about it is embedded in business processes. So based on who you are in your agency and who your upstream is, right, I can generate a transaction and it can automatically end up in your inbox, and I can know whether you've looked at it or not. And it can be escalated, and it can do a lot of other cool things. But at the end of the day, what we're creating is a record of who touched the transaction at which point and how long it took you to do it. So we're starting to drive some important things into the system related to performance, okay? So we can start to measure performance with automated workflow. Reduction of human errors. These systems are implemented, now I'm going to talk about implementation for a second, implemented such that the codes that you use can be forced into a transaction or defaulted into a transaction based on what you're trying to do. So you still have to think, but you don't have to worry as much as you might currently worry about choosing a wrong value or letting something get through that has to be reconciled on the backside. Every single state I've ever worked with, I don't know if you're different, spends a lot of time reconciling. How many people here reconcile? Is it easy? Sometimes, sometimes not, but you get used to it. So reduction of human errors, right? How does that system allow me to be more effective in my daily work without having to memorize things and worry about whether or not I chose the right code? And we're going to talk about that a little later. Analytics. Okay, everything you do in this system can be reviewed. Every time I create a new record, every time I make a change, every time I change a code, every time someone signs it, every time I close a period, anything in this system can be reported on, and it can be reported on in either real time or near real time. Real time means I press enter today and save. It's there for everybody that has access to that to see it. Okay, makes sense so far? How much of that do you have right now? Show of hands, if you believe you have access to real-time information right now, show me. Is that in the current system? Okay, well, talk to her. She knows how to get it. That's not common, right? Because we have batch processing, we have systems that are feeding the current system, right? And sometimes there's a lag time between what's happening in an external system and what's happening in your book of record, if you will. The other thing I want to talk about is accuracy of data. And we talked about the efficiency a little earlier and how coding happens in these systems. And I know that if you're typical, you're thinking, oh my gosh, they're going to change all the codes again, and I've got to remember how to do everything. And I'm going to give you an example at the end of this presentation that shows you that you should maybe worry a little less about that. Let's talk about reliability. So reliability, duplicate entries in ERP don't happen. They don't happen as long as we can key a number correctly. And a number, by number, I'll use an example, an invoice number, okay? If the invoice number is 1234 and there's already one in the system from the same vendor that's 1234, it will not let you save it. If you put 1233, it'll let you save it. But the point of this is that if you are diligent in your work, and I think everybody here is wanting to be diligent with their work. I know I do every day of the week. You can make mistakes, but the system will catch it, right? So you'll do a lot. Question?
You said that you could only put the invoice in once. What if there's multiple sub-objects that have to be divided out? Those are going to be multiple lines of code. Okay,
well, and hold that question for my example at the end, because I'm going to give you that exact example when we go over how ERP works. And in my world, and I've replaced this particular system. Our stars are famous. We're the same system. I've replaced it 4 times. It's the same question every time. And in my world, a sub-object is nothing more than a lower level of an account, natural account. How many accountants here? True accountants? natural account, right? Expense, revenue, asset, liability. Okay. So good question though, and I'm going to cover that in my example at the end. And then cost, improved controls and one consolidated system of record. How many IT people in the room? Just 2 of you? All right. Oh, here they are. They're a little shy. Okay. So you're thinking to yourself, okay, how can it be a consolidated system of record if we have legacy systems that have to interface data in? And my answer to you is you can leave that data out there in those systems, summarize it, and just send me the financial impact. So what I'm talking about is one consolidated system that tells me what my financial position is at any point in time as long as we've interfaced data in that I'm relying on from the outside. Make sense so far? Any questions? Okay, so I'm going to go on to the next slide. ERP, if you think about it, is like a hub and spoke. How many general ledger accountants in here? What's the center of the universe? The GL, right? We always say that. But it's true in ERP because the general ledger is your book of record. That is where all of the transactions come into the system so that you can look at your cash position, your fund balance, what your spend is. It doesn't matter what it is. You have to have that in a summarized fashion to be able to produce statements at the end of the year, specifically your CAFR. But the spokes that are connecting each of the modules in these pictures are there to represent how data moves in and out of the general ledger, right? So sometimes the general ledger will feed data out there, i.e. the chart of accounts will be defined in the general ledger, and all of those other transaction processing systems will use those values. So there's data moving that way every time I add one. And then as I'm transacting in a module on the outside, data moves in. Make sense so far? There's also lines in between the modules, and what that represents is the connectivity or how each of these modules talk to each other, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But the general ledger, again, is the hub. The spokes that connect the GL are there to allow modules to communicate with each other, right? Modules are built on business logic, and we're going to use you're going to hear the term business process a lot. Who in here has an example of what you think a business process is? Anybody? Where's my AP people? No AP people. Okay. We're going to talk about a business process in a minute that starts at a requisition and goes all the way through paying for the goods that you receive. Okay? There's a lot of business processes in there, right? Develop or create a requisition. Turn the requisition into a purchase order. 2 business processes. Receive goods when I get them, right? Invoice them, pay for them. Those are business processes, and they're interconnected in this system with business logic that runs in between the modules. Make sense so far? Okay. Each business process has multiple business capabilities, and we've been talking about these workshops you're going to come to, and business capabilities are what the system needs to do, not how it does it, not who's going to do it, it's what does it have to do. As an example, for a requisition, I want the system to allow me to put in multiple codes for goods and services, but I want to be able to define them. So that's a what, right? It has to be flexible. And then underneath those business capabilities and the business process is where you actually transact. So inside of accounts payable, when you're putting an invoice into the system, right, you are using business capabilities and a business process to drive how you push data into the system. Does that make sense? Seeing some of this? Okay, I'm losing you. All right, so now for you technical people in the room, this is the other picture of the hub and the spoke. Where's the center of the universe still? The general ledger. Do you see all the arrows going into the general ledger here? Let's talk about this for a minute. These modules, and I'm going to talk inside the world of ERP and the software that we're going to choose just for a moment, okay? Inside that world, we've got data moving all over the place here. We've got a lot of things coming into the general ledger. You can see all the arrows coming in. In some cases, you can see them going back out. And you can see the connectivity between the modules. So if you look at some of these, you'll start to recognize how data moves. So if you were up in the upper left corner of this picture, for those of you that are online, and looking at asset management, once you've got an asset in the system, right, what typically happens to it? You depreciate it, correct? Well, that arrow that's going down to the GL is booking that depreciation. It's also recognizing when you retire an asset. So if you sell it, what did I sell it for and how much money did I get for it? It's also showing you if you add value to an asset. So if you bought, I'm going to talk to the techies again, if you bought a rack with a bunch of blade servers in it and you added a blade server to the rack, then that rack of assets just became more valuable, correct? So that's an asset addition, just one example. But you can see that between all these modules, right, data is moving. And I'm going to use a term now, and I'd like you to write it down. The silver thread of transparency. Some people get scared when we say transparency. All it means is everything that happens in this system is linked. And I'm going to give you a good example in a couple of minutes on what that really means. So inside the world of ERP, the modules are integrated and interconnected, right? The integration that happens between them, again, is driven by process or business process, and it's a handoff from me to you. If you were the next thing down line inside the system, right? Workflow works the same way. If I initiate it and you're my upstream, right? As soon as I press save and there's workflow, it's coming to your inbox, right? Make sense? Silver thread. Who started it? Who did it go to? Where does it end up? And then as a transaction moves all the way through, this silver thread of transparency becomes complete. So at some point, they all end. And that's where this analysis and reporting is so important, because you now will have the capability, if you have access to view the information, and we're going to talk about security and some other key concepts in a minute, but if you have access to see it in your agency, you'll know where it started, what day it was, what time it was, where it went in the next step, how long it took somebody to look at it, how long did it take, and just start thinking about this, right? And think about it until we get to this big picture that I'm going to show you at the end and give you an example. Any questions on this for a second? 2 seconds? 3? Okay, we're moving forward. All right, some other key concepts that I think will help you as you come to some of these workshops. The systems are highly configurable. What that means is, don't worry if your agency has to have 52 different types of codes for right now. What you need to think about is, did I define a capability that allows me to have 52 codes? And if you care about the fact that those 52 codes have relationship to themselves, object, sub-object, sub-sub-object, then what you're looking for in a capability is the ability to create a hierarchy, right, within any field that exists in the system. And if you have a hierarchy, that starts to create a relationship between the data, and as long as you choose the right code, right, then things are right. And we'll talk about choosing the right code in a minute. So the values are user definable. During implementation, we're going to work with all your agencies when it comes to things that agency A might have that agency B doesn't ever use, right? What will be common is, though, that somewhere at a high level, guys like Brian Tinney care, from a state perspective, what the roll-up looks like. He might not care about the detail down below it, but he'll care how it rolls up. Make sense so far? Okay. Flexible rules that can be enforced at various levels. So let's talk about rules for just a second. There's several types of rules. There's rules that say, as we implement, you can never use this fund with this expense account. That's a rule. So what has that just done? It's allowed you to never be able to choose something wrong for that type of transaction. If you're an enterprise agency and you only have one fund, I can default that fund into every single transaction you ever put into the system, and you don't have to think about it. You don't have to think about what your agency number is anymore, because I will know who you are and who you belong to. Okay, so when you log in, I automatically know that you're in the Department of Transportation if that's where you're from. Okay, just a couple examples. Another rule that can be created is you could potentially put a rule into the system that says this expense account can be used with these two funds only if you had access to two or more funds. It can never be used with this project, and we'll talk about projects in a minute. So if you're starting to see the flexibility of rules, you can define during implementation the relationship of fields to each other, what will and what will not work together, what is available to me, what defaults to me automatically. If I'm an enterprise fund again, I will never see the other funds unless I'm doing potentially a do from that's interagency. So these systems allow you a lot of flexibility with respect to rules. Workflow, we've talked about this quite a bit, and workflow is a wonderful thing, but be ready for it. If you are a supervisor and you have 10 people reporting to you that are all transacting, your inbox will start to look. Got another question? I'll stop.
In the implementation stage, you said that we can implement rules. Does the rules include master indexes?
Define a master index for me, please.
Master index is kind of a pre-keyed combination. Yes. That only can be used in a certain way.
You can. I'll use a term that is pretty typical in ERP. It's called combination editing. A combination edit, along with what's called I'll call it a quick code because it's easier to understand. I could define a code 1, 2, 3 that'll always give me an entire accounting string just by putting 1, 2, 3 in. Does that answer your question? Okay. And these are good questions. They're the questions that always happen. The warning on that is when you create a lot of those, and I just came from running a project up at the city of Seattle recently. I want you to guess how many of those codes Seattle City Light thought they needed. Somebody in here guess high. Come on, let's participate a little bit. Rich, you don't get to count. You were there. Who said 1.5 million? Darn good guess. 30,000. Now think about 30,000 codes that define the relationship of a string of data, and who has the capacity here to memorize 30,000 things? Me either. Who has time to manage it if it changes? Me either. So they're powerful and they're very useful if it's something you do again and again and again and again and again. But you can get yourself in a bit of a quagmire during implementation if you create too many of them because you have to maintain them. So lots of ways to do that. They're powerful, and I typically advocate that you create those for things that you do very consistently, right? There's other things that you can do that make that work too, like templates. Let's move on. Interfacing with other systems. Every one of those modules, and if you think back to what it was, if you look at this picture real quick, every one of these modules have standard interface protocols in and out of them. So if you have a system that's going to live on after this ERP is implemented, there is a way for you to move data into the system, right? And we talked earlier over here on this side of the room about a translate engine. If your system is going to still speak your current language or your current object, sub-object, and all the other pieces of information that are in it, we'll translate that on the way into the system so that we can understand it. Got a question online finally.
Yes, we have a Skype question. Okay. So, can combination editing quick codes break out the cost to multiple accounting strings, essentially prorating the total cost to multiple accounting strings?
All things are possible. Does that answer your question online? I'll talk about multiple lines of distribution a little later in my example, but that's a good question, and the answer is yes, that's possible. Okay, so every one of these modules, including the general ledger, can bring data directly in from the outside. So as an example, let's use accounts payable here on the left side near the bottom. If you are going to maintain an accounts payable system at some point in the future because it's unique to your agency and you're not going to get rid of it, and if it's on that list of systems that are going to live, you would still transact from an AP perspective in that system. Those transactions would be summarized, right? Summarized based on the coding that's in them, and then posted to the general ledger. So the detail stays outside of ERP, and the financial impact comes in. Now, if I wanted to know from the inside in the ERP what that entry was that you posted in from the outside, I've got an index or a key that tells me where it came from, and it tells me what the value was by each of the strings that were unique. I can punch back to that entry point that came into the system, and you would know where in your AP system to go back and look at all the detail. Make sense? Okay. So every one of these modules has a way to bring data into the system if it's an external system that's going to still live. But we still have one integrated book of record in the GL. So role-based security. We've talked about this a little bit, but I want you to understand what it really means. Role-based security means that you can have access to one or more things in the system as long as it doesn't violate accounting segregation of duties. Okay? A lot of the work that we end up doing in these implementations, is always related to who should have what, and it often clears or clarifies blurred lines. So based on who you are and what your job is, you could potentially have access to accounts payable to enter invoices, but not approve them. You could view invoices whether you entered it or not, right? But you're narrow. You could have access as well to all the warrant information. What was the warrant number? When was it cut? When was it cashed? Right? But you can't change anything with respect to the warrant. You can just view it. So there's two basic types of information that you can have access to. You can enter and update, right? Or you can view. And then there's the approver role on the outside. Are there any questions about role-based security? You can have access to one module, two modules. If you're a supervisor, you can have read access to everything. Really depends on how you run your business in each of the agencies as to how you want to set up security, but you have to remember the golden rule, which is if it violates separation of duties, it will likely not be given to you. Make sense? Okay. So within a module, if you get access to it, it also limits what you can see based on who you are. Back to the example of DOT. If you're a DOT employee and you log in to look at invoices because you've got access, do you think you can see the invoices for the Office of Financial Management? No. You get to see yours. DOT, right? How many people here would like to see everybody else's invoices? How many people process transactions for multiple agencies? There they are. Okay, I was waiting for you to raise your hand. So here's what happens. You can be granted access to do transaction processing for multiple small agencies, right? And again, it's just, do I give you one agency? Do I give you two? Do I give you five? So the system is flexible enough to be configured for people that are a central agency supporting multiple small agencies that might not have accounting departments. Go ahead. We got a question here. Right here.
So my office does accounting for several agencies, not necessarily small agencies.
Okay.
So Healthcare Authority, formerly Dell, DCYS, and DSHS. And so I need access to all three of the larger agencies and sending transactions to them. So if they determined they have to keep their claims data, like Provider One, outside of the new ERP, and another one decides that they're not going to, I still need to get all that information to the GL.
Right. So the one that wants to leave it on the outside processes on the outside. It's summarized and it posts to the GL. You'll know the summarized entry that posted. Do you have access to their external system now?
Their external system interfaces to my system.
The detail or the summary?
The detail.
Okay, then in the future you might push the detail in. We don't typically advocate that, but that's an option. You could potentially generate it on the outside, move it into ERP, and the two would match.
So I had a question about your different modules back. So you see the accounts payable. So I deal with receivables of those that have been overpaid on the payables.
Okay.
Not just receivables for fees or such. So is there a link between the payables to the receivables so that the coding used in when it was paid comes into the receivable so I can return it to the GL?
The answer is yes, but you'd have to look hard at it. It's right here.
Okay, so that might need to go in arrow both directions.
Yeah, it can.
From payables.
It's a dotted line right now because it can go whichever way.
Okay, thank you.
Good question. Thank you. Any other questions before I move on?
Got an online question.
Oh, we have an online question.
Okay. Currently, AFERS allows input and release for same person. Will that be prohibited in the new system?
One more time.
Currently, AFERS allows input and release for the same person. Will that be prohibited in the new system?
It depends on whether or not somebody internally determines that that's a violation of separation of duties, and that's an implementation question, but it's a good one. In my most recent implementation, there were small situations where there was some folks that needed access to be able to do both, and that's typically given out very narrowly. You don't want to have a lot of people that can do both things. In every place I've ever been, there's one or two reasons that has to happen. So I'm never going to say no, but I'd always caution you that that's probably something that you want to constrain. So let's get back to where we were here. How are we doing on time? Good. Okay. We've talked about role-based security. So before I move off this slide, I'll allow you to ask some more questions if you have them. If not, we'll just move on because I think the meat of what I want you to see and what this has been leading up to. Okay, this is just a sample. We mocked this up. Now, this is where I want you to start to use your pencils. Okay? I want you to write down, there's three pieces of information here, and this is just a fake requisition screen. It doesn't represent any kind of software. We made it up, but it's important from several perspectives. There's three areas of information here. There's a header. The header is just a portion of the record that's going to tell me who did it, what date it happened on, right? Requisition date and accounting date, and I'll tell you what those are in a moment. It assigns a requisition number. I picked the vendor Office Depot in this example, and this happened to be related to a contract that we have with Office Depot that allows me to buy goods and services, or typically goods, at a specified price for certain items. Make sense so far? Write that requisition number down for me, please. And then I would like you to write down two other pieces of information. What fund am I buying out of? Down in the accounting distribution detail. Okay? And is this related to a program? And if it is, what's the program number? Now let's talk about how I got data in here. When I logged in, the system knew that I was John Smith. It automatically knew that because I have a login and a password. So it automatically defaulted my name in there. It automatically defaulted in 8/28 because that was the date I physically started this requisition. The next field down, accounting date. Why is this important? Anybody got a guess? Accounting date's driven off the day I entered this, right? And in your world currently, the accounting date or period for 8/28 is this one, correct? 14? Okay. That defaulted in. I didn't have to key it. I didn't have to tell the system when this was going. It automatically knew. It's based on an accounting calendar. That total there is nothing more than the sum of those lines that are in the next section down. So far, so good? Pretty basic stuff, right? Okay. So let's talk about the middle section for a second and how I got data in there. If I have a contract with Office Depot, I likely have a catalog that's been predefined for me in the system that tells me what I can buy from them. Stacy talked about it a little earlier about sort of like Amazon-like ordering, right? E-procurement, if you will. That catalog is out there for me to look at. I can look through the catalog. I can see a picture of paper. I can see the ink pens that I wanted, and I can also see the stapler. All I had to tell the system was how much of each of them I wanted once I chose them. Now, here's the magic. That item number is predefined, right? When I chose paper, and I chose it because I looked up paper. I didn't know the number. I found paper. I want 100 of them. Great. That number, 1089, automatically defaulted into the system. I had to tell it I wanted 100. The contract defaulted in, the unit price, and it automatically did the extended amount for me. Here's the beautiful part. Because I've identified, for those of you that are online, I'm starting to look at the bottom section that's accounting distribution. The beautiful part of this is I did not have to tell the system that I'm buying it out of the general fund because in my agency, I knew that's where I charge paper. I defined that during implementation. I did not have to define that it was fiscal year 19, period 14. I didn't have to tell it that I was with OFM. It knows I'm with OFM. I did not have to pick the account. In your world, that's object and potentially sub-object or sub-sub-object. I have defined out there in that catalog that every time I buy paper, it goes into account 7801. The program I had to pick. I got a question over here. Right here, Ben.
I feel like you've probably answered this question a few times, but I want to make sure that I'm clear. The line of accounting there that you have that is auto-populating from these preset defined, I forget what you call them.
They're configurable values. We configured the system to...
Key term being configurable.
Yes.
So you can at any point go back in and revise what that is. I
could. You can override it. So if for some reason this defaults in, and that's a good question. I think your question is, if I bought this and it was, and I'm pointing, for those of you online, I'm pointing at the line that's paper and account number 7801, right? And if for some reason, later down the line, and we'll talk about later down the line in a moment, you realize 7801 was wrong for some reason. Can you override it? Yes, if you have the right security. Okay? You can never make these things ironclad, right? Let's all be real. We all do business a little bit differently, and we all want to not be constrained. But as Stacy said earlier, we're looking to develop standard things that are common here. And the flexibility under the common is typically a configured value, right? Or some business logic in your agency that drives you to do something a little bit different. At the end of the day, you're still buying paper. And you still want to know that it's going to some specific place, and you want to be able to measure how much paper you bought for the year, right? By period, by day, by whatever. How much did it cost you? Yes, ma'am.
You said that it will look up the contract amounts and put it in. What?
No, you have to know what contract to tie it to.
Right. So when the contract number is in there,
yep,
it automatically populates the price, correct?
Based on what you chose, yes. Because the contract would have multiple lines of things you can buy and a contracted price per unit.
What if there's a sale on that item and that price is not valid? Can you overwrite the contract price?
The answer is yes, if in your contract you have specified pricing tolerance. And a pricing tolerance says that I'm going to give it to you at a standard price. However, from time to time I might sell it to you cheaper, and the tolerance is X minus whatever percent. So as long as it's in that tolerance, if you override it, it'll accept it. Does that answer your question? Okay. Good question, though. Okay, so program is something you had to choose, right? Is this related to a specific thing in my agency that I want to track globally, right? I could have all kinds of things that are expenses that I want to track into a single program, and that's a mechanism to do it. Again, I made up all this stuff. The other thing that I do want you to realize is if we weren't working off of a catalog, I could have searched for any of those items there in English. I could have looked for paper, and the system would have given me all types of paper I can buy if it wasn't contract related. And when I chose one of them, the account would have defaulted for me again, right? So during implementation, we're going to define what paper is, right? For my agency, I always want it to go to 7801. For your agency, it's going to be 7803 because I care whether or not it's colored paper or white paper or 8.5 by 11 or 11 by 17, right? So if you want to get at the sub-object level, it's up to you to tell us during implementation how you want the relationship of paper to work. Make sense? Okay. Now I'm going to move off of this screen. I asked you to write a couple of pieces of information down. This is a high level process flow, but it is going to give you an understanding of the silver thread of transparency. So in create requisition, what was the unique requisition number I asked you to write down? Okay, so I created a requisition. It had more than just that number on it. It had all that accounting distribution information in it, didn't it? Right? Told me what I was buying, how many, what fund, what account, what fiscal period. It had a lot of information down in that lower level section. In the next step here, workflow approval process. If this young lady in the, what color is that? Yellow. Okay, I guess I'm blind to color. I was going to say mustard, but if you're upstream from me, what's going to end up in your inbox after I pressed save? That requisition, right? It's going to have a link. It's going to have what everybody here know what a hyperlink is? Hyperlink's an underline. When you press on it, it takes you somewhere and shows you more information. You press on that hyperlink, it's going to open that requisition for you to look at. You're going to be able to see everything that was in there. Question that happened over here on my right. Can I change the information? If you have access to change that information, you can change it right now before it ever goes on. Or you can let it go. When you press approve, it's going to go to the next step. Business processes are moving data through the system so that nobody has to rekey it. The next step here, auto create PO. What does that mean? Auto create means if she approved it and didn't change anything at all, it's going to take every bit of that information on that requisition and auto-populate a purchase order. It's going to copy all that information in automatically. The key that's going to happen here is it's going to assign a unique purchase order number. So whatever the next number in line is, it's going to put that one in. How many unique numbers do I have so far? One for the requisition, one for the purchase order. Do you think I can see after that purchase order moves down line what the requisition number was on it? Do you think I can see who did it? Do you think that I can see that the young lady here in the mustard sweater is the one that approved it? Do you think it's going to tell me when she approved it? Yeah. Okay, you start to see how I'm building information here. At any point, I can look this stuff up online. The next step, update to the general ledger, and it says project, but it's really a program can be one or more projects. Question?
Yes. Is there a way to get like a dashboard to let people know on your desktop that you do have something pending versus getting a ton of emails? Because email management is always an issue.
There is, yeah. Yeah, there's a couple of different ways. In most SaaS applications, you can have a dashboard. In this particular case, if we're talking about requisitions and purchase orders, if you were an approver for both, you would have a dashboard that says open, pending, requisitions, and it would just give you a number, and when you click on the number, it'd blow that thing open, and you'd see that you have 22 requisitions you have to look at. Good question, though. Same thing with purchase orders. Online question.
Will agencies be able to create their own flexibility to change on the fly for the approver? For example, someone is out of the office.
Good question, and yes. That's called forwarding your authority, right? And again, whoever I forward that authority to has to have the same level of access to the system that I do. We all go on vacation, right? So if I know I'm going to be on vacation, the beautiful part of these systems is you could proactively set a date in the system that says, I am going on vacation on September 23rd through the 30th, and I want you to automatically route all of my approvals to John Wright because he loves doing approvals. And John would automatically start to see those, and he would be able to approve them. Another online question.
It's the same person, just what if the person is out unexpectedly?
If they're out unexpectedly, an administrator can route them, can reroute them for you as long as they have access from a security perspective to be able to make that change. We have another question. So another online question. Same person?
No.
Okay.
Okay. We accept electronic invoices in an agency email box. Will this be encouraged as part of implementation?
Stacy talked about e-procurement, and part of e-procurement is being able to route a purchase order electronically to a vendor. They would send you goods and services, and if you have received the goods and services in the system, they could automatically send you an electronic email or an electronic invoice based on the purchase order. So the answer is yes. Any more questions before I move on? Okay. So we've auto-created a purchase order. We've updated the general ledger. So as soon as I save that purchase order, I encumber what fund? Ask you to write it down. General fund. The general fund now has $769.50. Is that what the number was? It's okay, but you remembered it. Okay, see, I can see. We'll talk afterwards. Okay, but good point, right? The system knows how much was there, right? So it was all encumbered out of the same fund, but they were different accounts. There were different accounts, right? One fund, different accounts, same program. All that information's moved forward. It posted into the general ledger, and now I've encumbered funds. Those funds are no longer available until I either clear the purchase order with an invoice or I decide I'm not going to purchase the goods and services and I cancel the purchase order. Receipt of goods. This is a concept that you may or may not have now. In ERP, there's something called three-way matching. Three-way matching is nothing more than a purchase order matches an invoice, matches that somebody said that they received it, okay? This next step, quite often, when you're ordering goods and services from a purchase order, you're going to get that stuff before the invoice shows up. Now, there's vendors out there that are pretty smart. As soon as they send it out the door, they do the invoice and they send it to you at the same time. So I'm not saying it's always the rule, but for the most part, you'll get those goods before you get the invoice. So if I'm a receiver of goods, I open the box and, oh, lo and behold, I got 100 reams of paper. I got 12 pins. I don't remember how many there were. And I got, no, there were 54 pins and 12 staplers. But I count them. Yep, got 100 of those, got 54 of those, got 12 of those. I have said that I got everything that I ordered. Do I care what I ordered? Yeah, I do. How did I receive them? There's usually a receiver, right, attached to the box. What would that receiver have on it that I would need? It's one of the two numbers. It's the purchase order number, right? Purchase order number, I key that thing in. That purchase order is going to come up on the screen. I'm going to say, I counted 100, got 100, counted 54, got 54, counted 12, got 12. Save. I now have a record that says I ordered X, I got Y. Happened to match in this particular case. So now I've got a record for that purchase order number that I got it. So that's that unique receipt. Third number, I got a unique number assigned to that effort of recording that I got the goods and services. Goods, right? New number. So I have a requisition number that was unique, tied to a purchase order number that was unique, now tied to I've proven that I received it. Okay? Next step. In the mail, I get an invoice. This is not going to go away for you unless it's the electronic invoice that the person online just asked about. I get an invoice in the mail. Now I have to enter that invoice. The easiest way for me to enter that invoice is to look on it and see if the PO number's on it. Because you are the state of Washington, in the future, you should be telling everybody that sends you goods, don't send me an invoice if it doesn't have the purchase order number on it. If it does not have the purchase order number on it, what does it have that I can use? Who'd I get it from? I can go into the system. I can look up open purchase orders for Office Depot, right? And I can find the right one. Typically, if you got hundreds of them from Office Depot, this becomes problematic. But Office Depot, I know, based on experience, is very good about putting purchase order numbers on their invoices. So let's say the invoice number was on, or let's say the purchase order number was on the invoice. When I enter that PO, right, what's going to get populated again? All the lines that were on that purchase order. And that allows me as an AP person to look at the invoice and say, are you invoicing me for more than I ordered? No. You're invoicing me for 100, 54, and 12. Is the unit price on your invoice what I ordered on the PO? Yes or no? Right? Other than that, I don't have to define anything. All that coding that happened way back there on that requisition came forward to the purchase order and now is automatically there for me to apply to the invoice. So all I have to say is this invoice matches this purchase order. Now, the third leg of the stool that we talked about, which was a receiver, three-way match, right? I've got two-way match right now. Invoice matches the purchase order. There's a record out there that's a receiver. Once those three things match, and I press save, here's what happens. Number one, I create a liability, right? So now I have a payable. The other side of that entry is the expense or the account that got drugged forward with that requisition. The important piece that happens here is it now liquidates the encumbrance, right? I've moved from encumbering funds to recognizing actuals, right? So the accounting side of this thing for the purchase up to liability has happened. I've got a silver thread all the way back to the beginning. Every piece of information that ever happened to that thing, I can see it at any time. Next step, invoice can be paid. If it's a three-way match, the system does two things. One, you can save it, right, and it's payable. Number two, it starts the clock for when that thing has to be paid. When you set vendors up, you set up vendor terms, right? 2% 10, net, net 30. Well, if you're net 30 here, 30 days from now, from today's date, not the date the guy put on the invoice, right? Which is also an implementation option you could do. Typically, it's accounting. Got a question online?
Where does asset management come into play?
If I would have bought an asset, I would have marked one of those lines on the requisition as an asset. So there would have been a field that would have said asset, yes or no, and I would have said yes. Now I made that screen super simple. Second question.
If AP staff change the account coding when processing the payment, does the new coding go back and change to the original PO?
You typically don't change the coding after the PO is saved. And if you do, best practice is to go back and change it at the origin. Next question.
What about discounts? Are we able to change the amount we are paying?
You don't get to ask questions, Ramsey. Okay, just a second. This is one of my guys for those of you online. The answer is yes, you could override the terms, right? Again, that is an implementation decision. And again, it depends on who you are and what security you are given, whether you can override those or not. Does that answer the question? That'd be a yes. In the back of the room.
How do we interact with our P cards? We use P cards to pay things, and I don't see how this would work in there. So
okay.
Do we have
I'm gonna tell you that typically, in most of the places I've been, P cards are usually more often than not, a P card is not related to a requisition. It's related to I got to have it right now, and I'm buying something. If you use them in advance here, it's nothing more than a tender type. I can have a conversation with you when we have some time because I'm not real sure that I could explain it eloquently or quickly right now. Did you have a question? We have a question right here.
The latest issue of the Institute for Supply Management gives the figure of $450 for the creation of a purchase order in most, especially in the public sector. What is the estimated cost of creating a purchase order using this system?
You know, that's a good question, and I'll ask you a question back. How flexible are you going to be in thinking ahead and defining templates and streamlining how you buy things? How much do you buy off of a contract? How much do you buy things over and over again? Are you willing to create a template that
I understand the way that you're proposing now is that the purchase order will be created each and every time.
No, I'm not advocating that necessarily. I'm saying that where I've been before, I see them used without purchase orders more often than I see them used with. That's other states, and that's depending on how they chose to implement the product can do both. Right.
So the option will still be there.
Yes, ma'am.
To use a P card.
Mm-hmm.
How does the transparency work?
Yeah, P cards. The P card owner is registered inside the system. Right? I know who has P cards number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. When he uses that P card, there's typically a clearinghouse for the P card. So all charges for the P card come through the clearinghouse. The clearinghouse can tell me that I went to Office Depot on a certain day and bought X number of dollars worth. Thanks.
So then the search can be done by the card number?
Yes. Okay. That's correct. Okay. So where were we here? We were getting close to paying. So let's say 30 days has elapsed. I'm going to run what's called a pay cycle report. It's going to tell me all invoices for one agency, two agencies, all agencies, depending on who has the access to run it. It's going to show me what invoices are due based on the terms that I set for that vendor, and we said it was 30 days net. This invoice that I keyed in is going to come up. There could be reasons that you don't want to pay it. For some reason, they did something that you don't like and they're on hold, or whatever reasons you might have here. Doesn't mean you automatically have to pay it. What it does mean is the system's telling you, based on the definitions in the system, this thing should be printed on a warrant today. Okay? You have the choice of unchecking that one and not paying it. But you also have the choice of reviewing them and going, well, I don't have any of these that I should stop, so let it go, right? A file would go out there and you would print warrants for all the invoices that were due. In this case, we have one warrant that's due, $769.50, I believe is the number. And it's going to add a fourth unique number. What's the unique number? The warrant number. So now I have a tie between the warrant number and the date that it was cut back to a receipt of goods, an invoice, a purchase order, and a requisition. And anybody that was involved in that process. So anybody that touched that transaction all the way through the process has been recorded. And it's date and time stamped down to the second. Who touched it? I know the lags between. I know the lag between the day I cut the requisition and the day I cut the warrant. I know the timing between the requisition and the auto creation of the purchase order. I know the time between the purchase order and the receipt of goods. So are you seeing where the silver thread of transparency is starting to occur? Go ahead. Online question.
Will the system allow partial payment?
The answer is yes. Okay. Okay, so I printed the warrants. I'm gonna post to the general ledger, right? And this says liquidate encumbrance, but that's not right. It's actually, it's gonna liquidate the encumbrance only on the budget ledger, so don't let that confuse you. But it is going to recognize the expense for the invoice. This next step, you may not, any treasury people in the room? Okay. Positive pay file. Anybody here know what a positive pay file is? Okay. Positive pay file is every warrant you cut has a unique number. You know who you cut it to and you know what the amount is. You send that to the bank every time you cut warrants. The bank now knows if a warrant is presented for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever the number is, for $769.50 to Home Depot, that they should honor it. If it's anything different on that warrant number than was in that positive pay file, the bank knows that they should not honor it. Somebody has changed it. Okay? So let's say it all matched. I'm going to clear it. They're going to send me a file back every day of the week of the things that cleared. When that comes back through the system, what is the link of that warrant to the cash side of that entry? I just took money out of fund number, right? Available fund, cash, and paid that warrant. Question online.
Would we be required to use the encumbrance piece?
That is an implementation decision, and I don't have an answer for you. Advice as an implementer would be, I would advise you strongly to use it because it allows you to know what your spending is at any point in time, whereas if you do not encumber, you could potentially not know. Question up here in the front row, Ramsey.
Regarding the printing of warrants, will our relationship with the state treasurer be the same? Because currently, we don't ever print warrants. We don't touch cash.
Got it.
Will that relationship stay the same?
We've had some preliminary meetings with the folks in Treasury, and we've kind of talked about a standard process in the future, and there has been no determination right now. I think ultimately they'll still be the ones that control the printing of the warrants, but you would always have all of the information that's related to it. When did it get cut? When did it clear the bank? When did I get the file back? When was my cash balance reduced? Okay, so you'd still have access to see it, but that's again an implementation decision. So all the way on the back side of this thing, you're going to see that after I got that file from the bank, it has all the warrant information in it. The system's smart enough to auto-reconcile the silver thread of transparency. So when I got that warrant back, it automatically knew it was attached to requisition number and everything in between all the way through. All I have to do is look at it and say, I agree. Anybody excited about not reconciling in the future? Do you see the possibility of this system? Okay, I think we're at a place now where we need to break. And so if you'd like to ask me questions during the break, I'd be happy. How long of a break are we looking for, John?
It's going to take 10 minutes.
10 minutes. Thank you for your patience. And
started here again. There'll be plenty of time afterwards to catch up a little bit more. Please take your seats. Take your seats, please.
Yeah.
Okay, if we can come back in, we'd like to get going here. You got the clicker. I keep wondering how anybody that's online is going to see me doing the pointer thing. Probably doesn't work. Okay, so we're going to start to talk about the business capabilities workshop. So the first piece was just to give you some context about what ERP is, right? We wanted you to start to see what the future holds for you with respect to, efficiency and, cost and all of the things that I talked about in the last hour and 20 minutes or so. But I think this is why a lot of you are here, right? You want to know, what's this mean for me, and how am I going to come in and be a part of this process so that we choose software that's going to work for us, right, as an enterprise, right? And so to that end, I'm going to introduce my colleague here. Christy Broderson is from the state. She's a procurement subject matter expert, and she's going to lead the next section of discussion here, and I'll be here to support her. I had some good questions at the break regarding other areas of ERP functionality that if you'd like to stay after we're done, I'd be happy to stand here and talk to you for as long as you'd like to ask me questions. But in the interest of moving through the agenda, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Christy to tell you a little bit about what we're going to accomplish over the next 3 or 4 months. Okay? There you go.
All right. So Jeff kind of went over my part of the agenda. And I apologize. We're going to play a fun game of how many things can I hold at once and keep moving and stand behind this and not look short. So anyway, it is so exciting to be at this point in this project. There has been so much work leading up to this, and I think the entire One Washington team is really looking forward to starting to work on business capabilities and how we can meet agencies' needs through this system. So obviously, we have a timeline, of course, like every project, right? And this, of course, is a finance and procurement software business transformation process that we're going through. We start with, oh mercy, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
For those of you online, Christy's going to use a pointer, and she's going to tell you what she's looking at. It's right here.
Okay.
It's just a little.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Okay. So we started, obviously, this task you can see here has been completed. We're on step 1. So that was a process where we went through and we looked at capabilities that are common amongst all of the different softwares that are available in the marketplace. We went through these capabilities with our business experts. So on the procurement side, our business experts were Department of Enterprise Services, all their expertise, and agencies they asked us to work with. On the finance side, they worked with Statewide Accounting, Brian Tinney's whole team, and we went through and looked at those common capabilities. We asked them to help us in any gaps we might have in common capabilities. And then we're preparing those lists of those common capabilities to bring to the pilot workshops. So what we're about to start going towards is the pilot workshops, which are going to commence in October, which Stacy talked about earlier today in the timeline. Those will be with a small audience. This gives us an opportunity to test the format, to see how the days go, to see how the timelines are working, those types of things. We'll collect all the feedback from those workshop participants around their concerns or any common capabilities they bring up around the capabilities. And then we'll gather that feedback and we'll integrate it into the product that keeps moving forward. And then we will move to step 3 here, where we'll go to common capability workshops. This is to the larger audience, many more state agencies. And again, we'll look to fill our gaps. We'll capture capabilities common amongst agencies. That's the goal of the common capability workshop. We'll also start capturing in those workshops the unique capabilities, which we'll get into a little bit further on in the presentation about the differences between those. Then we're going to go, obviously, in December 2018, we're going to go to the unique capabilities workshops. And that's where we're going to start meeting with those agencies who did identify unique capabilities. We're going to invite them back, talk about those unique capabilities, hopefully define what those look like, how we write those so the software vendors who are going to compete ultimately in this procurement will understand those capabilities. And then we'll add all those uniques to the final capabilities list. And then we move into something that I think all my procurement friends out here get excited about. I do, at least. So user stories and use cases. This is sort of where you really get an opportunity to start writing those use stories and those use cases around, show us how this process will work from start to finish. So that the evaluation of whatever software vendors come to the table in the procurement process have those user stories to help the state identify what things they'd like to see in demonstrations as we move towards the procurement process. And so all of that commences in February of 2019. Figuring it out, here we go. We want people to understand the difference between business capability and business process. So this is something to keep in mind as you look at the list of capabilities that'll be sent as you prepare in your agencies to come to the workshop. We want you to sort of look at it with what's in scope of the workshops. So of course, in the workshops, we're going to define business capabilities. And so we're going to talk about, what do we want the system to do? What kind of functionality do we want this system to have that we ultimately choose? What approvals does the system need to process? That's an example of a capability you'll see in the lists that are going to come out. What to include to help the software vendor understand the capability. So any detailed information about what that would really look like, what we're really asking for. Those are things that are in scope of the workshops. Some of the things we want you to think about as future phases for discussion as we get towards implementation decisions are things like defining business processes. So for example, who's going to specifically perform the transaction? that's something that's down the road. So when you look at these capabilities, try not to, and we know ourselves even, that's kind of hard to keep your mind out of. So that's why we want you to sort of go back as you work on these in your agencies and go back through your handout, because it kind of helps you have that framework and that frame of mind we'd like you to use as you review them. Another example of something that's sort of outside of scope of the project is which agency would be the steward over that functionality. Or who's going to enforce a policy, for example, or who's going to be a specific approver. We just want the system to have the ability to have multi-layer approval processes. That's what we're trying to get at with these common capabilities lists. So when you get these pre-work materials, you'll see that there are common capabilities and unique capabilities. We're focusing right now in this phase of the process in the common capabilities. So we're trying to look for things that are consistent across most state governments, right? Things that can be flexible via what type of application we choose or how we choose to configure it, but they're pretty common. A common capability example would be the ability of the system to route a purchase order for approval, for example. That's a uniform common capability that every state has to have that process in place. Where we get into the unique capabilities workshops, and as you have these discussions in your agency, we're looking for things that make the state of Washington unique. So things like things that are required or mandated by state and federal statute, a law, a regulation, a governor's directive, a grant requirement that your agency may have. And so we're looking for those to come later in the process. An example of a unique capability that's pretty unique to the state of Washington is the ability for us to track emissions for the type of vehicles that we purchase. This is something that's very important here in the state. So that's an example of a common capability. Do you have a question? Okay. Thank you, Ramsey.
So when you're looking at unique capabilities, one agency could have 15 unique capabilities, another agency could have 20. So you're not talking, the agency itself is not unique. It is the capability that is unique, and there could be multiple per agency.
That is actually
That's spot on.
absolutely.
Right? So we could have 2,000 unique capabilities within Washington state that need to be addressed, not associated with any particular agency.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah, and that's an excellent focus, and something that we're looking for people to really sort of wrap their mind around is not the unique things of how your agency does something, but a unique thing that your agency is required to do by a federal statute, a grant, something like that. That's what we're looking for you to capture and bring to us. Any other questions? Okay, so these are capability definitions. These are things you're going to see throughout all of the pre-read materials that are going to be coming out. Every single capability starts, where possible, with these three phrases. Sorry. So we have the ability of the system to. So it's something that the system needs to have the capability to do. So an example of the ability to system to send notification for cancellation of a requisition. That's something that we need the system to be able to do. Ability of the user. One of the things, even all of us that have been working on these for some time now, sort of sometimes gets stuck in our head when we hear the word user. So we want you guys to really just look at that and think, okay, this user may be a vendor. This user may be a bidder. This user may be a state employee. So you have to sort of look at what capabilities you're looking at to sort of wrap your mind around the user. We intentionally left that as a very generic phrase, not to get into state terminology. So you'll see things like ability of the user to. So an example of that is the ability of the user to add different billing and delivery information for each individual requisition line items. So for example, if you have a requisition that the line items are going to go to multiple locations, you would have the ability for the user to input that information. Then we have ability of the system to report on. I think this is one of the things, these are one of the things I think so many of us are excited about, right? Because so much of our work and so much of what we do ultimately ends up in analytics about how we're doing our jobs, how efficiently and prudent we're being with the state's money. So these are things that we want the system to report on. So for example, ability of the system to report on the number of requisitions submitted for each vendor. So if that's something that your agency likes to capture data on, which most of us do, right, or those repeat purchases, those repeat places we go to get our items, those information that are important to people like Department of Enterprise Services as they help us try to build master contracts that are meaningful to their state agencies. So that's an example of the ability of the system to report on. Oops, sorry.
Is the ability to write checks out of an agency only controlled bank account a common capability or unique capability?
That's a common capability.
Any other questions? Okay, so this is an example of a capability worksheet. One of the things we wanted to draw your attention to is these business function levels, level 1, 2, and 3. These are somewhat to help you understand the process for which we're discussing and maybe who in your agency would need to be invited to the meeting to discuss that capability. You don't necessarily need to get in too much detail or feedback around these business processes. What we're really asking you when you work on these leading into the workshops is that you really work or look at the capability description. See if those descriptions resonate with you. Are there things that are common capabilities? Are there things that we would like to see in the system? The one thing we do want you to keep in mind too is if you see a common capability that's written there that you don't necessarily do today or none of us do today, or another agency might do it and you just simply don't do it, it doesn't mean that it's not a common capability to other people. So as you look at those, keep in mind too, the other thing is we're doing a business transformation, right? And so it may be a capability that someday we'd want to have access to use, which is why it's in the capability list. So do sort of keep that in the back of your mind too as you review those. I wanted to like hone in on what it really is so you can see these because we know the printouts and these screens are a little small. So this is an example of a capability description. Ability of the system to generate purchase requisition number automatically and in sequential order. That's a common capability we all want to be able to have in the system. So that's just one capability. We also want you to understand that there are process flows behind all of these capabilities in terms of behind the scenes about how the process works. There's lots of these that we will discuss in the workshops. So you'll see at the bottom when you get these process flows, these are sort of the user guide, as I look at it, about what the shapes of the sections mean. So obviously there's things like a manual process, a system process, a decision point, a connector, so where it goes to something else, data, of course, on this page, meaning that's a process within this business flow, or off page where it goes to another process design. So this is one example. So this is where we have, for example, a procurement requisition. This is the managed purchase request. So it starts, obviously you can see here, it starts with, so sorry, I'm having to read these as I go here. Okay, so it starts with create or amend a requisition, obviously, right? And so this is just the process flow for how ultimately these things happen within our agencies. We know you go through a process and you get approval, put information on. So you'll see these as we go into the workshops. You'll see these process flows shared with you, also with the pre-read materials. So we do want to talk about sort of the overview of the workshops. So obviously we've been working with your agent. Oops, again, man. Okay. So we've been working with your agencies to define who the participants will be, which is all of you that are here today and on the phone. We're going to discuss the business process flows. We're going to have agencies provide additional capabilities, of course, that's the intent of meeting. And then we'll document any feedback you have and hopefully continue to improve that product and make decision points as we go. The workshop detail, one of the things, as you can see by all these people in here today, we do want each agency to send one representative to each workshop. We understand behind the scenes as you meet and discuss these capabilities, you'll have a lot of people in your agency that want to participate in those conversations, and you'll need them to. We just ask for use of the time and the room space that you send one participant to each workshop. Workshops will take place 2 days a week, so we're trying to do these Mondays and Thursdays or Tuesday, Thursday, stuff like that as we go through these. There will, by the time I'm done, I will know how to do this, and I apologize. So there'll be a procurement workshop and a finance workshop working concurrently. So one in the morning for procurement and finance, one in the afternoon for procurement and finance as these things go along. There will be a workshop facilitator, and they'll go through the business process flows, of course, for reference. Then we'll begin discussing the capabilities in groups. So for example, one thing we might say is initiate a purchase requisition, for example, and there may be 17 capabilities that are included in that one process flow. We're going to go through and talk about those, like we'll say, does anybody have any common capabilities that were missed or questions that need to be addressed on 1 through 17, and that's how we're going to do the day. There's way too much information, unfortunately, to go one by one to make these workshops meaningful for everybody. The workshop, of course, is used to collect additional capabilities. We're not really there to reword capabilities. These are things that are pretty common across all the platforms that are available in the marketplace. So we're looking to do that. Workshops will be 4 hours long. And of course, in regard to time management, there may be things that we might have to put in a parking lot, and we'll document those and have to either circle back or close that loop with an agency who might bring those things forward. But we do, as you'll see, some of these capability lists, there's a lot to go through. And so we may end up having to use the parking lot model. So we wanted to give examples of appropriate feedback and things that just aren't really helpful or help us drive great. Can we add a capability for X? So for example, that might be something like, you didn't capture in this capability that I have a region and I need to tie it to that region, for example, right? So that's something, obviously, that's great feedback. We would take that, incorporate that, and move on and keep discussing. My agency does X that is not done at other agencies. Can we add a capability for X? That's exactly what we're looking for to get that feedback. A complicated process we do in our agency is X. Can we add multiple capabilities to cover X? So for example, some agencies run a lot of complex IT projects that require different layers of approval, like OCIO oversight, budget plans, and stuff like that. Maybe that's something that your agency does very often. Another agency may do that once in 10 years, right? And so we want to capture those things. Some examples of things that don't help us work through these efficiently are things like, I don't like the way this capability is written. That doesn't exactly help us make it more meaningful. So the way my agency operates is different from everyone else. We all know that we all have different business lines, but in general, we're trying, like Stacy covered earlier, to talk about those common ways we do our business. The way my agency operates is too complicated to be done within a single system. We hear that feedback. That's why Jeff and so many others today have talked about systems that may not be able to be replaced and interfaces that might need to be created. We understand that. So we have heard that message. So that's an example too. So what we're asking you to do in preparation for the workshops within your agency.
We have an online question real quick.
Can I get clarity of unique capabilities? Admission was provided as an example. Does this mean admissions will not be included in the ERP, or will or will not be included in the ERP?
It is something that could be covered as a common capability. What we're trying to describe there is other states may not have that as something they track or statistics they want to capture. And so we just use that as one example of something that is unique to the state of Washington. It is something we like to capture. So that's why we wrote it as a unique capability. Any other questions? Yes. Thank you, Ramsey.
How does the determination from centralized purchasing that many of the smaller agencies do, everything funnels into one office for them to move forward with this process? How does that affect those agencies larger that have decentralized purchasing, which is then moved out to administrative support people, maintenance personnel, engineers? How does this process, how do you capture that? Because a small agency that, have 5 people purchasing is going to handle things and be able to control how this is done versus an agency that may have 1,000 or more people touching the purchasing process.
Right.
The key word you used there multiple times was how, not what. So the capability you're looking for is flexibility in the number of participants in a transaction or approvers or, that's a decision that has to be made during implementation. But the common capability is, what does the system have to be able to do, right? You have to be able to control it, whether it's 1 person or 50. You have to be able to allow 1 person access to it versus hundreds.
And to help you a little bit, I think those things are addressed in the common capabilities that we've worked on thus far. To Jeff's point, that is sort of a configuration decision about how you give access, who gets what level of access to initiate a purchase. For example, maybe a region can buy, these 20 things, for example, by themselves without having to go through headquarters. Or, maybe they can purchase anything and they just have to report on it. That's all, to Jeff's point, configuration decisions that later have to be discussed. Does that address that for you? Okay. All right. Any other questions? Okay. So, in preparation for the workshops within your agency, what we're asking is that you review the pre-read materials and the communications that are sent with them. There's going to be instructions and checklists and other things that come out to help your agency prepare for these conversations. We do ask that you meet within your agency to review the capabilities. Like we said, we're asking you to send 1 participant to the workshop so we can effectively move through these. But we do anticipate, especially for those of us on the procurement, purchasing, and contract side, right? Some of us don't have all of those people in the same division even, so you might have to get a lot of people in a room to talk about a process flow. And so that's what we're asking you to work through as you review these capabilities. We do ask that you reach out to us with your questions. That's all of us have a strong desire to be responsive, to meet your needs, to open those lines of communication. So we do ask that as you have questions of those, that you reach out. We are putting together a business model around how we will communicate that input back to you and address your questions. So you'll see that in the pre-read materials coming out too about how that will work. We want you to include your input from your agencies to prepare for a workshop. If a business capability description doesn't cover your agency's needs, that's where we're asking you to bring up what needs to be added. What else do you do? Like we said, there's been a lot of us working on these, but look at all these years of experience in this room, right? So there may be things that we just overlooked, or, for example, a type of procurement that we didn't list, and that's what we're asking you to bring to us so we can capture all that and meet your need. So the other thing that sort of happens on this journey we're all on is we're trying to go from sort of old way of thinking to new way of thinking. So examples of those are, so what do we do today with our current technology? So we want to move to future state and sort of move our minds towards how can we use an ERP to work more efficiently in our future, right? So it's not necessarily about how you do it today, what system you do it, what other system you have to put it into. We're saying, let's think about how we can use all these capabilities in an ERP to help us do our work more efficiently. So an example is a customized system. You're going to hear this a lot from a lot of us around the capabilities discussions. So how can a system be customized to our specific business process? As we know, that's not the intent of buying a SaaS product. So we're trying to change our thinking to how can we adapt or change our business processes to leverage the functionality that's available in these systems, for example.
Understanding that the system is highly configurable. You just keep thinking about that, right? What does it have to do is what we're trying to solve now. How we do it with configuration and flexibility from one agency to the next in the future is the heavy lift that happens after you choose the software.
And I'm going to transition to Steve. He's going to come back up.
Can we give a round of applause for those who presented today? Kirsty did an outstanding job. Okay, we're just going to wrap up. I was notified that I did not introduce myself when I started. My name is Steve Quigley. I am a project manager on One Washington, and I care very much about this particular slide. So we're going to just spend a couple minutes on this. You're going to also receive a copy of this slide and also the next slide as you leave the room so that you have a good understanding and a memory jogger of what you need to do to prepare for the workshop. So would you raise your hand if you've been identified by your agency as a representative for the capabilities workshops? Raise your hand and hold it up. There are some that may not have been identified as representatives, but you're here because you want to learn, and that's really great. So what I'm going to be talking about now is important for those of you who have been identified as representatives for your agency. The workshop sessions that start in October 1st to be specific, and the general workshops will start in the afternoon of October 4th, are critical. They're foundational for business transformation because that's where you're going to have an opportunity to learn and agree with everybody else on some common capabilities, and you'll be able, as you were told earlier, to identify unique requirements that your agency might have that have to be considered. The business capabilities will then be collated, and by the end of the year, we will have documentation that reflects all of our business capabilities, both common and unique. Those capabilities will be used in March for a general RFI that goes out to many vendors who will then look at that documentation and they will check, yes, I can do it, no, I can't, and we will then have a response from many SaaS suppliers as to what they think that their capabilities are, what their product can produce for us. We will then reduce that number of suppliers, potential suppliers, down to a very small number, 2 or 3, and we will take those business capabilities that you've helped to produce and to refine, and we will meld those into some user stories, and we talked a little bit about user stories here just a minute ago. There may be a dozen or so business capabilities that comprise one user story. Those user stories then will be provided to the few remaining potential suppliers, potential candidates, and they will come back with demonstrations on how they can meet those user story requirements. And out of that, we will then reduce the number to one supplier in the end and select a solution that we will then implement beginning November of 2019. So you can see that your participation really is foundational. It's really fundamental. And we are hoping that you can see that and can see your role. You're representing your agency in this effort. We need one representative from each agency in these workshops. Please be prepared. There is pre-read material that's going out. Make sure that you've not only read it, but you understand it, that you come with questions, that you're not trying to take the time during the workshop to get up to speed, that you are prepared ahead of time so that you know what we're going to be covering and what you need to ask and what the issues might be. Be professional, don't talk over each other, please. We're going to have a large group, and there's roughly 2,000 business capabilities already defined. That's a lot of material that we have to get through. And so as a project manager, I can see the potential for meetings to get derailed sometimes. So we're asking you to come prepared and look at it from an enterprise perspective, look at it from a team player perspective, and help us move this along because we have to get through it. You have an agency checklist. You may not be aware of that, but there's an agency checklist that's been sent out. If you haven't seen it, check with your leadership because that agency checklist will tell you what you need to be making sure happens at an agency level to make sure that the agency is aligned and able to participate effectively in this process. And again, look at it from an enterprise level, not just an agency level. Please do consider it from an agency level, but also keep a broader perspective. Be concise, help us follow the agenda, help us to minimize interruptions. It should be obvious that when you go into a meeting like that or a session like that, they're 4 hours long, plan ahead, make sure that you've delegated your responsibilities back in the office to somebody else who can take care of that for you so that you can be focused and you can be engaged. Turn off your phones and the whole thing. The last item we want to really focus on here is that we really do want to invite you to be part of the extended One Washington team. We want you to see yourself as change champions. We want you to feel the passion around this as you begin to learn more and more about it and you become invested. Please help us drive this through the rest of the state. There's over 100 agencies in the state, and it's a pretty good-sized ship to turn. And we are really making history, as I mentioned earlier, because we are doing something that really hasn't been done before, not only in the state of Washington, but across the nation. There's very few states that have gotten past where we're at right now, actually. There's 2 or 3 that are a little bit further along. So the final thing I would say is that the surveys that typically get sent out after these sessions are critically important for us. There's only like 2 questions, I think, 2 or 3 questions. So please answer your survey. Make sure that we know of your needs or your concerns. We're probably pretty sure that you are really thrilled at the chairs that you're sitting on today. We've heard it before. We've asked to make a change there. We haven't seen it yet, but we're still working on that. But please give us some feedback about some of the concerns that you might have, what might make these things more effective. And again, at the end of this, after I cut you free, you may come up to the front. Jeff's going to be up here. The Accenture team will be up here. Our subject matter experts will be up here to answer your questions. And please feel free to stay as long as you want and ask any questions that you might have. Any other questions, generally speaking? Okay. Yes, in the back. Let's get a mic to her.
So you mentioned demos. Are we going to be invited to participate?
We haven't identified who will be included in that part of the selection process. And I'm not sure that we've identified whether or not they will be recorded or not. I'm guessing that they won't be recorded. So there will be somebody from your agency, more than likely, that will be tied into the process, but we haven't actually defined the process yet. Did you want to say anything else about that? What's typically done?
Depending on who you choose, they don't allow you to record it. So,
another question in the back.
There was a workshop named Technical Specifications, but there wasn't any additional information on what exactly that workshop would entail. Do you have any information at this time?
Yeah, technical specifications are typically those things that are outside of what I talked about earlier, business process. It starts to involve some of the things that I did talk about, though, like standard interface protocols, security that has to exist in the system. What does the SaaS environment look like? How is it hardened? Who has access to it? What are the reporting capabilities that might not have been covered in other areas? You know, what are the databases that you care to work with, right? You might not want to work with DB2 because it's kind of been there and gone. You may say, you know, we're interested in Oracle and something else. You may want to know what the system architecture looks like, right? There's, you know, and I'm being very brief because I think I give Anthony over 400 capabilities as a starter set, and he's done a great job in consolidating those down and starting to bring things in like cybersecurity that the state cares about. So Anthony Shepard or Shep, not to be
raise your hand
with Mo and Larry.
Raise your hand.
We'll answer those questions. Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, let's get a mic over there, and then there's one coming.
Yeah, my question is, how soon will we be able to take a look at the 2,000 business requirements you've already put together?
So there is a schedule that is being sent out to you if you haven't already seen it, and that schedule will identify the topic pertinent to those capabilities. And we won't be looking at every single capability. We will be looking at groups of capabilities, but you'll have a chance to see them all. And we start on October 1st with the first pilot, and it goes through the rest of the month for all the common capabilities. The month of November and into December is basically for the uniques. And so that's the when. There is a timing as far as the topic is concerned. And I don't remember which one's first, but for you, but
Project accounting is first.
project.
And typically you'll have the capabilities a minimum of 2 weeks before the workshop ever happens. In some cases, many weeks before the workshop happens if we can get them all out. Our goal is to get them out as early as possible to give you the opportunity to look through them and have more time in your agency. The timing for the first one is driven primarily by the amount of time that the team needs to get all the materials ready into a standard format to send out so they're consistent. So does that answer your question? Okay.
And what Jeff was just talking about is the pre-read material. There will be material going out in a lump sum and also little memory joggers along the way to make sure that you know what you need to be reading through in terms of the business capabilities and what the topics are going to be and what the agenda is or what the schedule is actually. Okay, there's another comment over here.
So I had 2 questions. So to go back to what was said about the technical workshops, those workshops are still going to include agency participation as well?
Yes.
And then for the vendor selection, has it been identified what the selection criteria is going to look like?
No. Not yet. We are in the process right now of defining what the competitive procurement process is. Meeting today, in fact, to put some things into the schedule, but that hasn't actually been fleshed out yet. Was there another question? I thought I saw another hand. Okay, over here. We're getting you a mic.
Okay, when we get ready to go live in this, is there going to be like a development or QA at clients available to agencies for doing their own training with their personnel, or is all training going to be handled through like OFM classes?
That's a good question. That's a change management and implementation question, and John Wright's sitting in the back row, and he'll field that for you.
So the intention is that One Washington at the program level is going to provide and oversee and facilitate the high-level training that all agencies need. It's not to say that some agencies couldn't have a particular or peculiar thing that they need to do within a field office or something, but whether it's remote accessibility or on-premise training, we're going to provide all of that.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
And I think it's also safe to say that you're not going to be hung out to dry. So as we go through the implementation, we will be working with agencies as they try to develop their own training programs within to synchronize that and dovetail that with the One Washington program. Is there?
Oh, thank you. I was wondering what the other states are that have already implemented.
Let me clarify what Steve said. There are many, many states that have implemented ERP. There are very few states that have implemented SaaS or in the cloud ERP. And the difference primarily between the two is SaaS products do not allow you to customize. And old school ERP, when my hair was dark and I started this career, allowed you to be very flexible. And what used to happen is every state always wanted to recreate what they already had, but with a new tool, right? So that's the primary difference between what you're doing here. You're leaders in adopting or making the decision to go SaaS versus what we call classic ERP or on-prem. Does that answer your question? So there are 2 that are currently in process. You would be the 3rd. However, there's a 4th that the RFPs already came out, and they're going to start before you do. So
who are the 2 that are in process?
Maine is one, and Massachusetts is the second. And those were both originally classic ERP implementations that are now transitioning to the cloud.
And Idaho and Nevada are just now getting out their RFPs.
Those are coming out. Nevada's out.
Any other questions?
Going back to the work sessions, so if we can only have one person attending, am I assuming they're going to go through for the 4-hour block? In some cases, there's, I guess, 2 4-hour blocks for the same topic. Are they going to then come back to the agencies to work within that agency and then report back to the group? or is it all going to be done in that 4-hour block?
Good question. We're sending these materials to you in advance, and our hope and anticipation is that you will talk to the right people based on the subject before you show up to the workshop. Right? Come with all the questions that you can generate internally. Come with those if you think you need to add them, and then we'll bring that information in and figure out how we have to triage what we've already got and get you the information back on what the outcome was. Does that answer your question?
So in essence, the end of the 4-hour block, they're done, moving on.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. The schedule is that tight. We can't hit it more than one time. We're doing commons and then later on uniques, but we're not going to be recycling or going in a cycle. So meet with your people internally first if you need to.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and make the statement that I struggled with making, so I'm going to make it anyway. I've done this 15 times now, at a state level 4 times, and multiple other times in upgrades and other things. And here's what I need you to understand. The software vendors that are getting invited to the process can all do, for the most part, 90+% of anything you can think of, okay? The differentiator, right, between who you ultimately choose to come in and give you demonstrations and then ultimately choose one software is, in my experience in 20+ years, 24 years, is always driven by one or two things, right? One, did I like the look and feel of that one versus that one? Because they both did it, right? They both allowed me to do a multiple distribution PO line, right? They both did it just fine. Software A, I had to go through 20 clicks, and software B, I went through 5. Or they both showed me how to use a template, and boy, I don't know, based on what I saw, equal. The second thing that typically happens is from a technical perspective, right? What is more closely aligned with what your state-driven technical requirements are? So to state it a different way, if you miss 1 or 2 unique requirements, not a deal breaker, right? What you want to do is look at your business from the perspective of what do I have to get done, right? We all do the same stuff. I hate to be blunt, but we do. We buy stuff, we pay for stuff, we track stuff, and the rules in between, the how stuff, right? That's implementation. So come with your best information internally to be able to look at what we've said are common and say, you know what? I have 3 things that are driven by statute or law, and here's what they are, right? Because that might be a deciding factor too, right? What if one of these SaaS providers does the 50% of your uniques, and the other guy doesn't? So that's the secret sauce here, right? Come with an open mind and think, you know what? Nobody's going to get it 100% right, but what we're starting with here is 85% of what I've seen in every state that's ever implemented an ERP product. Fair enough? Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, so we'll have subject matter experts up here if you have questions that you want to just talk to them one-on-one on, and make sure that you pick up your handout on the way out. Make sure that you did sign the register on your way in.